Okay, we're now recording. You ready to start there, Chris?
Sure.
All right. Wondering where everybody is. I hope that link worked.
Got me here.
Oh well. We'll get started, and I'll try to make sure everything's working properly. Can you be on the other computer? Or I can just give you my. Once we get started, I'll try on this. All right. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody who's listening in. Our guest speaker this evening will be Chris Deweese. That's him. He will introduce his topic, and we'll roll right into the study. I'll ask God's blessing and presence here, and we can let Chris do his thing. Great Creator God, Father in heaven, we come before you now and give you thanks for this Sabbath day and for those time zones that's delight in the soon coming Sabbath. Father, we just thank you for your truth, your knowledge. Thank you for allowing us to understand your word. And we just ask for your presence here now in the listening and the speaking, and inspire, and the speaking, the listening, the discussion that will come from this. And we just thank you for everything and place this into your hands now in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Okay, Chris, it's all yours.
Okay. Share screen. There.
Undo.
Share screen. And play. Oh, is it going to play? So, hi everybody. It's me, Chris. I haven't been around in a while. Sorry about that. Life's been keeping me on the road, and I haven't had a lot of time on Fridays to do much of anything except just to get home and get ready for Shabbat. Today I was going to talk about the cycles in the Bible, cycles in general, but particularly focusing in on the sabbatical year and the Jubilee. Lately, I was on an accidental like a series of messages or a series of sermons that just accidentally looking at the events in the Bible and looking at the context and just actually reading it the way it is, and rather than trying to extrapolate or find deeper meaning, just looking at things from a pretty basic standpoint. And this sounds like it's silly, but at the first day of unleavened bread, we had a pretty big gathering in Kansas City, and I gave a message where I talked about the 10 virgins. Actually, it wasn't the first day of unleavened bread. Somebody else talked in. But I was talking about the 10 virgins and how there are so many teachings out there about the oil in the lamps and what they represent. They represent faith. They represent preparedness. They represent all of these different concepts. But I'd never heard anybody talk about what it actually meant in a literal sense, because if you look at the context of what Yeshua was talking about there, he's talking about the bridegroom coming in the middle of the night. And the people who had the oil in the lamp could be seen, and they could see where they're going. And it was just a very basic thing to touch on and illustrate. And afterwards, as Pastor Jeff is one of our friends that we cooperate with in Kansas City, he pulls me aside. He's like, and he just recently retired from the Southern Baptist ministry. He says, Chris, I'd never heard anybody in all these years actually talk about the oil in the lamp from a practical sense. And he was just like, I should have had a V8 moment. I had never heard anybody do it either, and I kind of stumbled across it. So that's kind of where I've been thinking lately, and what's just been drawn to actually read the text, absorb it, and kind of try to put myself in that time frame and in that mindset as to when the things were actually written and what it would mean. Because today we don't have oil lamps, we're only 100 years away from having oil lamps. You used to have oil lamps up until the electric light bulb, and now it's kind of a foreign concept. But back then, it was a pretty big deal. So, with that said, we're going to start with some practical stuff here. With the first slide is Genesis 1:14 and 15. It says, "Then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so." And also on the screen is Leviticus 23:1 and 2. Yahweh spoke again to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, Yahweh's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations, my appointed times are these." So, in this group of very, long time Sabbath keeping and holy day keeping people, this is kind of old hat. But in the Messianic and Hebrew, people are always talking about the deep stuff, and they always forget to talk about the basic stuff. So I apologize if this is old hat, but to make it a point really simple here is that the word here for seasons in Genesis 1:14 and 15 is the same word as for appointed times in Leviticus 23. That's the word moed or moedim. Now, that's a key thing to say that Leviticus 23 is actually talking about something that's the same as what's going on in Genesis 1:14 and 15. So the next slide says, Yahweh spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall have a Sabbath to Yahweh. 6 years you shall sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard and gather its crop. But during the 7th year the land shall have a Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to Yahweh. You shall not plow your field, nor prune your vineyard. Your harvest aftergrowth you shall not reap, and your grapes of untrimmed vines you shall not gather. The land shall have a sabbatical year. All of you shall have the Sabbath products of the land for food, yourself and your male and female slaves, and your hired man and your foreign resident, those who live as aliens with you. Even your cattle and the animals that are in your land shall have its crops to eat." Now, to tie this into what I was just talking about as far as the seasons go, the sabbatical year would be timed to happen based upon the motion that Yahweh put the planet in Genesis 1. When he set the world in motion before there was even a man, before mankind was created, he established seasons and he established appointed times. And in Leviticus 23, we'd look at these to say this is what we're supposed to do year after year. And now we take it another level and say that every 7th year there's supposed to be a break. And this is a very intriguing concept because this is a true set of equality here, because the whole nation was supposed to take a break from agriculture and was just supposed to let everything rest and let everything go easy and relax and take it as it comes. So Yahweh knows how he made the planet, and he knows that it needs a break, and he knows that people and animals need a break too. That's why he made these cycles. And it is possible that it wasn't quite like this before the flood, but this cycle of the sabbatical year is a very big sign of faith. Because if we look at it from, again, the practical sense, if we look at it from plugging ourselves into the mindset of people who were slaves and had to work 7 days a week for hundreds of years, it's a pretty nice thing to say we're not going to work certain times of the year, we're not going to work a day a week, and here is an entire year that we're going to take off. And it might have sounded like a pretty good idea to them, but it also would have sounded like a something very difficult for them to do. But not planting and not harvesting would have required them to have an incredible amount of faith, because this is an agrarian people. who are used to having flocks and herds and planting and reaping and eating. They're accustomed to eating the food that they have just planted or that Pharaoh just allowed them to plant. Not doing this and expecting to have a harvest and expecting to have food is kind of a strange thing that would require an incredible amount of faith in their Elohim, because you would have you think about the context of this commandment has been given through Moses to millions of people, and they're like, what do you mean we're not gonna plant but we're gonna have food? How can that possibly be? So if they had actually done this, even just the one time, it would have been a huge sign of faith. Now we take it to another practical level. The neighboring nations would see their vulnerability. In the context of Joshua 5, once the Hebrews circumcised themselves and they crossed the Jordan, then they were able to partake of a miraculous set of crops that was just waiting for them. So that right there should have been their first sign. Well, okay, maybe their 45th sign that the Almighty was going to take care of them, because they'd just been fed in the wilderness without having to work for it. They were able to keep Shabbat in the wilderness and have a double portion on Friday, on the fifth day, on the sixth day, and then now they're crossing over, and now they have all this food that they can make, and they start making it, and this is part of the seasons that we're talking about, because they're having an unleavened bread festival, right as they start the new year, as they start their conquest into this new land. Yah provides for them enough harvest for them to be able to start the conquest without him having to feed them from heaven anymore. And they start by making what? They make a new lump. They didn't have a lump for 39 years. Now they're going in, and every family is harvesting, and they're gaining, and they're crushing the stuff up, and they're making their own starter lump, and they're starting in to their conquest. And the first thing they come up against is a walled city called Jericho. And what is the significance about a walled city is that the culture back then for regions to be safe would be for them to set up a city with a giant wall around it and a water supply coming into it, and all of their crops from the previous year stored within it safely, so that if anybody had gone up against it, they couldn't siege them for an extended period of time. So at this point, Yahweh shows them that, guess what? That mode of defense is not going to work. Not against Yah's people. They march around it 7 days. The wall falls down. They were able to despoil the place. There are some problems. But now we look at this in the literal sense. They've had their days of unleavened bread. They've got their crops that were miraculously provided for them in due season. And now they come up against a city that's afraid of them. And the city thinks that the wall is going to protect the people within it, and they have all of their crops and their water supply, and they're going to withstand this siege from this foreign people. And no, they're not. They didn't even make it 7 days because Yah was with them. So Yahweh's building a culture here that is counter to what's going on in the rest of the known world at the time. The rest of the world leans on their own understanding. They think if they build a high enough wall and a deep enough moat with a big enough water supply and a big enough grain storage, that they can withstand any enemy. And he's showing, no, you can't. What he's showing is that with faith in him, his people will be able to overcome anything, and they will not have to worry about what they're going to eat. So, next slide. This shows the importance of these sabbatical years that they didn't actually keep. In 2 Chronicles 36, 20 and 21, It says, those who had escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon, and they were servants to him and his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the words of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days of its desolation it kept Sabbath until 70 years were complete. And then Jeremiah 25:11 and 12 rings true as well. It says, this whole land will be a desolation and a horror. All these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Then it will be, when the 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares Yahweh, for their iniquity and the land of the Chaldeans, and I will make it an everlasting desolation. So these land rests, which are a pretty foreign concept to us. I don't want to say complete, because we have people who are watching, or we know people who have agricultural lifestyles who actually observe this now. But Israel was set to be a called out nation, and these land rests were to make them look like a peculiar nation, but also to show their faith. They were supposed to show their faith in Yahweh by trusting that he would not let anybody destroy them if they showed this vulnerability. If they had observed the Sabbath rest, once they were established and they conquered the land and they got their portions and everything started calming down and all the bad people were pushed away, and they never observed the high days. So they got punished for it. But the reason they were supposed to, the high day, I should say, rather, the sabbatical year, they didn't observe the sabbatical year. There's no record of them doing it. Perhaps they did and we just don't know. But they, had they kept these land Sabbaths, their enemies from afar would have looked and said, look at these foolish people. They aren't planting. They don't have a wall. They're not preparing for us to siege them. So they would say in the 6th year, word would spread. Because as they entered into the land, they did a huge conquest. They slayed a lot of people. And then if they were to have been so kind of confident as to set up their land as they're supposed to and keep this Sabbath rest, then all of these people would have looked on the nations that they crushed or almost crushed, would have said, now's our chance. We can get them. They don't have food. They haven't planted. They're not even working their land at all. Look at these guys. They're going to be pushovers. And then the nations who they would have come against them and miraculously would have been pushed back. That was one of the purposes of this counterculture, was for them to have a 7-year sign of incredible faith that Yahweh, the provider, would provide for their defense as well as their food. But they didn't do it. And they got thrown into captivity because of these land Sabbaths. And I just think it would be amazing to imagine an entire nation not planting, yet being fed. That would have been huge. That word of that would have gone forth like the sound of a trumpet across the entire earth. Had they done this and had a 7-year land Sabbath where they didn't plant and nobody could invade them, they would have had a pretty big reputation. And the reputation would have been, everybody else needs to follow the God of these people, because our gods can't even take them out when they don't have food and they don't have walls. And they don't even have a king to organize them. Because if we remember, when this started out, they didn't have a king. So now we're going to start talking about the Jubilee, which takes this to another level entirely. In Leviticus 25, 8 through 13, it says, you shall also count off 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years, namely 49 years. You shall then sound a ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement you shall sound a horn through all your land. You shall thus consecrate the 50th year and proclaim a release through all the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his own property, and each of you shall return to his family. You shall have the 50th year as a jubilee. You shall not sow, nor reap its aftergrowth, nor gather in from its untrimmed vines. For it is a jubilee, it shall be holy to you. You shall eat its crops out of the field. On this year of jubilee, each of you shall return to his own property. Now, Israel had a big problem keeping the 7-year Sabbath. Here's the 50-year Sabbath, and there's no hint of them ever doing this. They never made it this far. I wish that weren't the case, but that's the historical record that I know of. But this time, they're going to be sustained for 2 years. They're going to not plant in the 49th, and they're not going to plant in the 50th. And that it would have been the most amazing thing to have ever witnessed, to see a nation of 2 or 3 million people sprawled out across the land of Canaan, sprawled out across Israel, to be protected, defended, and fed for 2 years without having to actually work at it. And it's kind of bizarre that they didn't have this faith, because they were provided for just like this in the wilderness for the 39 years. For 39 years, the cloud went before them, the cloud went behind them. Their clothes didn't wear out, they had food fall out of the sky, and they were totally taken care of. And now the Creator said he wanted them to continue with this behavior, to have these memorials, which are seasons that are set forth at the foundation of the world. The other part about this is the very practical sense, because a lot of people spend a lot of time in colleges today studying business cycles, and they study why do empires rise and fall. They study why do corporations start out small, get really big, break up, and die off. But it's part of our nature. It's actually built in. This is one of the cycles that's cooked into us as a people. And the Father knew it, because he said it every 50 years you need to go everybody needs to go back to where they started. You need to reunite families, and you need to have everybody start fresh. And you're going to forgive all the debts in the land. All the slaves are going to go free. Everybody's going to get their portions back, and we're going to start fresh every 50 years. Well, that's huge. How many of us have lived most of our lives with some form of debt or another? How many of us have thought, I want better for my kids. I want my children to have a different future. Of course, we all have. We've all gone through this, or we are going through this, because we live in Babylon and we have a Babylonian economy. But in the economy of the Almighty, he knows that people are going to get squirrely, and things are going to get out of hand, and people are going to sell their land. And another thing that's really unique in our day and age is the way that, like my family, for instance, we live 1,800 miles from our nearest relatives. We don't live anywhere near where either one, Diana and I, were born and raised. Families in the United States today are scattered all over the nation. And we have people in our nation who are from all over the planet, and they can't get a hold of their families and their kinfolk. Well, this is a reset to where everybody is supposed to go back every 50 years to where they started. And the whole clan would go back, reunite, refresh, get their land back, and they would start the economy back over again. This Jubilee is a major economic reset. And the Father knew that we needed it. And even without large business and technology like we have today, cities and nations try to avoid these cycles by shuffling money around and by offering incentives. And we have cities in our nation that used to be big manufacturing centers or big steel centers, and those industries declined, which pulled the people away. But these cities remain. We have these large metropolis areas, and the people don't want to give it up. They don't want to let the cycle work its course, so they try to reinvent itself in order to kind of jury rig around the cycle. But ignoring the problem, borrowing, it's not going to last for long. And that's kind of the course that our planet is on, because as we ignore the sabbatical years and we ignore the Jubilee, we're going toward a major apocalyptic event where things are just going to crumble, and then Yeshua's going to come and usher in 1,000 years where we can do this stuff for real. My next slide is Leviticus 25:14 through 19. If you make a sale, moreover, to your friend or buy from your friend's hand, you shall not wrong one another. Corresponding to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your friend. He is to sell to you according to the number of years of crops. In proportion to the extent of the years, you shall increase its price, and in proportion to the fewness of years, you shall diminish its price. For it is the number of crops he is selling to you. You shall not wrong one another, but you shall fear your Elohim, for I am Yahweh your Elohim. You shall thus observe my statutes and keep my judgments so as to carry them out, that you may live securely on the land. Then the land will yield its produce, so that you can eat your fill and live securely on it. The part about then the land will yield its produce is supposed to be in bold. I must have forgot to do that on the slide. But this is a really big scripture, and there's a lot of things going on inside of it. But the first thing to notice is that the people had to observe all the Torah in order to get what? Food. They had to observe all the statutes and all the judgments to carry them out so they may live securely on the land, and then the land will yield its produce. So what he's saying is you don't need the walled cities, and you don't even need to plant every 7 years. If you just do what I'm telling you to do as a nation, you'll live securely in the land. That's an amazing idea. It's quite a counterculture to what was going on at the time as well. But today, we're doing our best because we live in Babylon and we're trying to do our best. But someday, when that 1,000 years comes, we're going to get to experience this kind of justice. Because if we look at this, the price of a parcel of land is only, it's very exact. If it's 100 acres and it can produce so many bushels of corn, that's what it's worth. And if you're in year 1, it's worth 49 of those. And if you sell it in year 25, it's worth 25 of those. It's not valued the way that we value property in the United States today, where a 1,500 square foot house built in 1950 can fetch upwards of $1 million in San Jose. This is absurd. It's absurd for a piece of property to have such a lopsided price. Now, full disclosure, we have some land up for sale in South Missouri right now. It doesn't produce anything, but yet we don't have it up for sale for free. I guarantee you that right there. But to take this to another level is that one would never imagine that lending somebody $100 and expecting back only $100 would have anything to do with the amount of peaches that my peach tree will produce. But it does, and it did, because the scripture is saying that in relation to buying and selling and lending and doing business, that they had to keep in mind all of the time these sabbatical years and the way things were valued. This is a complete culture. It was supposed to be in the minds of the people constantly, just like in our lives today when we say it was the Super Bowl. Instantly, we all know it's early February, it's cold outside, there are lots of commercials for soda on television, and we know the entire culture of the society when we talk about that. If we talk about the 4th of July, immediately in our brain we think about cookouts, hamburgers, and fireworks, and having a couple of Leinenkugels for all these guys in Wisconsin, you know? So this is their culture. Their culture is, as they go through, and this is God's culture really, is to say that as you buy and you sell and you lend to people, you always have to keep in mind that at some point they're going to get it back. If they can't pay back, you release the debt at 50 years. If they do pay back, you don't get interest. If you buy land from somebody, they have a right of redemption. They have a right of return. If they don't, at the 50-year mark, everybody starts all over again. This is a beautiful culture that unfortunately the planet has yet to actually experience. So, in Romans 1:17 through 20, for in it, the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. So, when Paul wrote this, well, to back up a little bit, we usually look at this because we want to make the case that biology testifies of creation. That's primarily what we use these verses for. That the fact that creation testifies because you have a man and a woman, and the woman came out of the man, and the two come together, become one flesh. This is gospel truth, absolutely true. And we look at the way creation works with deer and with crops and with all of the ways that the different layers of the earth come together, and we mine stuff, and we look at it and we realize that it was created. And we have to sit back and understand that it's not an accident. And that's a good way to use these verses. But if we look at the word heaven on the screen, when Paul was reading and thinking and writing the word heaven, and Paul's a Jew. He's thinking of the word Shemayim, the heavens above the earth, as it says in Genesis 1. Bereshit bara Elohim Aleph Tav Eretz Aleph Tav Shemayim. I said it backwards. But in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, in Genesis 1:12, it says that the heavens were put in motion for seasons, for times, unappointed times, in order to see a release of debts, to see the blowing of the trumpet at Yom Teruah, to see the weekly Shabbat, and to look at the moon for the naming of the months. All of these creation was put together in order for us to know that there's a God and that we're subjected to him. So now we know in the future that all mankind will indeed keep Sukkot, and we know that all mankind will keep Shabbat, and it's presumable that all the appointed times are going to be kept in the millennium, and that we're going to be able to experience this culture perhaps for the first time that creation has ever actually observed it. And we can be confident that the offering we have today by observing these days is an acceptable offering to Yahweh through his Son. So I was talking about this today as these cycles of faith and life. Now Yah built us with cycles. There are other cycles that we see, the cycles of growing up, of becoming a man or becoming a woman, and the courtship. And then you see the youngsters today who are now graduating from college, and they're finding their sweetheart, and they're getting married, and they're staying in the faith. And we see these cycles, and they're wonderful things. And those are also the cycles of life that testify about creation. But these cycles about the Jubilee and the cycles about learning and the cycles about knowledge are part about what Solomon was talking about with the nothing new under the sun. That all philosophies end in the same exact manner. The cycles don't end, but what remains the same? To fear God and keep his commandments. No matter where you are in that wheel of life, no matter where you are in the wheel of faith, no matter where you are in the wheel of learning Torah and learning the Sabbath and learning the high days, or where you are, at every point, the same thing that stays true is that we're supposed to fear God and keep his commandments. And his commandments are made evident through his creation. As he made a creation, and he said he set forth the appointed times, the seasons, before he even created man. We have birth, we have baptism, we have marriage, we have careers, we have death, and then we're going to have resurrection. But as we keep our eyes on these cycles, let's just remind ourselves how Yahweh planned cycles both great and small for us before we were made in our mother's wombs. And that's the end of my official talk. Any questions? Don, are you still awake?
Yes, I am. I had to try to find the unmute. Sorry.
Oh, there's something in the chat.
Okay, here, let me. My video back on. Here we go. Everyone is a panelist except for Peggy. She's being panelized, and she's now an attendee only. You could unmute your microphone. Well, let's see. Yeah, you can unmute your microphones and ask questions. You can raise your hand. There's a hand raising thing available there if you want to raise your hand. Or you can use the chat room, either way, and ask questions or make comments. In fact, what I'll do is I will unmute everybody, and then you'll have to mute yourselves. So be prepared, you're all being unmuted. If you're speaking evil things, they will be heard. Here we go.
Hey, Chris, this is Al.
Howdy.
Hey, I have someone in the room with me here that wants you to repeat the last line that, as you were coming to a close there. Can you repeat that last line?
Not really, because it was kind of ad-libbed.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm cranking my desk down. As we keep our eyes on these cycles, let's remind ourselves how Yahweh's planned cycles, both great and small, before we were made in our mother's wombs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Chris, as you think about the cycles, obviously it's all by design, and there's so many different kinds of cycles. As you thought about these things, did anything occur to you as far as why is it important to have cycles? Is it because we have to have repeated exposure to something for us to absorb it? Or is it because with each passing generation, they have to embrace those same cycles so that they can see the same things that the preceding generation saw? I mean, what was it that seemed to be the main reasons for cycles?
I only got into that. I got into that in a different topic because it's kind of a partner type message. But with today, all of our learning is done academically. Right, when we study the Bible and we keep studying the concordances and we keep looking at the Masoretic text and the LXX and we look at all this stuff from an academic perspective. But if we read the Torah and understand that it was never meant to be an academic exercise. It was not, and it was in Yeshua's day. In Yeshua's day, they kept asking him over and over and over again, what about this? What about the lady who's married 7 times? What about this lady who was caught in the act of adultery? They kept coming at him with doctrinal things. And we've been trained to think in doctrinal fashion. But when you look at this, these cycles are built for people to live the Torah, not to be taught the Torah. They're supposed to get up in the morning and go about their day in a culture that is outlined in the framework of the Torah. So that way they would go to Sukkot, and every 7th Sukkot, I think it is, they would hear the entire Torah read. And then as you moved on through history, when they came back from Babylon, they set up the cycles of the Torah reading. They set up the synagogue system to where they have Torah portions that are read throughout the year, and they'd have a big scroll laying on a table that they just keep moving in a direction. And then at Sukkot, you'd have Simchat Torah, and you go and start all over again. And that's what's meant in Acts 15 when the apostles say that Moses is read in the synagogues every Shabbat. They're expecting the new converts to jump into this cycle so that they can start learning the Torah by hearing it read every week and then practicing it. And it's just my belief that the origin of this faith is a doing faith, not a learning faith. And we are Westerners, where we're accustomed to going to school and hearing lectures and taking tests and learning things through academia. But like for instance, this year I decided, or last year I decided to make a starter lump so that I could see how that process worked and then throw it out and make a new starter lump. That's a cycle. That's a cycle that Paul clearly commanded the New Testament believers to obey, to say, become a new lump. And because you are a new lump, you are unleavened or whatever, he tells them to become a new lump. So these cycles are there for us to learn, and they're for us to discover, because as you discover them, it shows that our Creator has got a plan that is so much bigger than us. It's so much bigger than us studying books and trying to get our T's crossed and our I's dotted, because we think about your individual lives and where you've been and how you've learned and how he uses you as an individual and your experiences to influence others toward him. So I think I answered that. Maybe.
Thank you. But certainly we must also admit that much of the teaching was done verbally, which would kind of be like a form of doctrinal teaching. I mean, when we look at, say, Psalm 78, the first 7 verses, it talks all about telling the children and the children's children. And that's, of course, repeated in different places. So much of the learning is still academic.
Well, it's a literal reading. If you look when they came back from the captivity, Nehemiah and Ezra did what? They had the Torah read aloud. And the only interpretation that was going on was for those who didn't understand Hebrew to have it translated into Aramaic for them. So, but I'm not going to discount what you're saying, because in the case of the eunuch had a Torah scroll, and he says, well, how can I learn without a teacher? So yes, there is an academic portion to it, but if we had the actual culture, if we actually lived in this culture, I think our learning curve would be pretty a lot less steep than it is today. That's
you're right about that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what the milk portion is. The milk portion is just getting the teaching, the lecture. The meat portion is actually implementing it and growing and becoming stronger in your understanding, to the point where then you become a teacher that you can give milk to others.
Yeah, and the nation was a nation of priests. A nation of priests is, if you think about this from a witness perspective, if you have an entire nation that can't be attacked every 7 years, and they eat without planting. Is that a nation of priests? Is that a testimony to the Almighty?
Oh, yeah.
It's a huge testimony. I mean, look at these people just walking around. They're loafing. They're taking off the year. They're like French people, but they're doing it for the whole year, right? Right?
Yeah.
And then they're like, yeah, whatever. You guys, you Canaanites, go ahead and try it. Our Creator's not going to let you get us. You know, it's amazing, but the academic side of it exists, and a lot of that exists because this culture was never lived out fully, so we're constantly trying to adapt it to our society, and then we try to relearn it from looking at it from a first century Judean society, which is very similar to what we're doing. We're trying to live the way the Bible says to live, surrounded by Babylon. They were trying to do it surrounded by Rome. So we look at their behavior and try to study that to govern our behavior, so to speak.
In essence, that's an excellent analogy because we're basically in the same boat. You know, we've got pagan, you name it, pagan government, pagan money, business, whatnot, just like they had in Rome, and you know, we're trying to function.
Yeah.
We're in the world but not of it, or trying to be in the world but not of it. That's the hope. But you know, it's intriguing you bring up the idea of cycles. I've tried to get through the book of Jubilees. Of course, I don't even know if it's the right copy, who even knows. But it's interesting about the concept of talking about weeks and that they're really meaning 7-year cycles and that sort of stuff. But taking it a step further, and I hope people don't think I'm being heretical, but you know, you talk about cycles and of the kingdom, it never ends. Of his increase, it never ends. It goes on and on and on. And, you know, I'm not calling this a grand experiment. I'm calling this the grand family building. I mean, how does it continue? You know, how is it another cycle? Is there another? I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm trying not to be sounding like blasphemous, but at the same time, you know, you hear about the eunuch who says, hey, you know, I can't have children, but the eunuch's told, well, you'll have plenty of children someday. So what does that really mean? Does that mean that there'll be other fathers and Yeshuas? I don't know. I mean, maybe I have no idea. Because we only have this like maybe 0.005% of the whole picture, and the rest we're taking on faith. But I don't know. Well, I'm not trying to do the Joseph Smith Mormon thing because that's just absolute craziness. But I don't know. How does it continue to increase? And I bet the cycle thing, I mean, it just ties together somehow.
Well, I think that. Oh, somebody else is going to answer. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to throw a heretical thought out there. You're talking about cycles, and I'm just throwing this out as a thought. I'm not saying this is gospel or anything else. But we have God the Father, who had a son. Son became human, died for the creation, working with a group of people. That group of people will then in the millennium become spirit and guide the rest of the planet to adapting to God's way and doing it right. What says that you now, being a spirit being, are going to continue to cycle in Christ's place? You now have this piece of the universe with a planet that's covered with water, and now you, through God's power, are going to do exactly like what was done again. It's just a thought.
No, we were
totally
talking
is the Joseph Smith thing. Actually, that's a pagan concept from Jonathan Livingston Seagull, a book from school. But the cycle that I see is that you have the perfect creation, and then you have the fall,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have redemption, and then the covering, and then you have chaos. It ensues from that fall, and you have the planet destroyed by water. And then this pattern, that pattern keeps playing out to a certain degree, because then you have the 70 who enter into Egypt. They become a mighty nation. They come out. They're redeemed of the Lord. Come out of this captivity, and they conquest and faith, and they have faith for a very short while, and then they fall away. Chaos ensues. What happens? They get conquered and carried off into captivity. They come back after the captivity. They read the law. They say, we're going to do that. Okay? We're not getting carried off anymore. Then they don't do it. The Greeks take them over. The Maccabees push them back. Then they have a small time of faith, and you have this period of time where there's nothing, and then you have Yeshua's day. And so now the gospel goes out to the whole world, and you have pockets of faith. But at the end, we're going to have the biggest decline ever, the biggest end of a cycle. Then Yeshua comes back, and then we have 1,000 years where Satan's put away. That breaks the cycle. Because up until that point, Satan plays a role. And when he gets locked up, Earth has 1,000 years to live the way it's supposed to be. He gets let out at the end. You have the great deception. Then you have the final destruction, a new heavens and new earth, and then the cycle is completely broken. And that was this prophetical amendment was sponsored by, right? Okay. Okay.
Well, it's a jubilee. It's a reset.
Well, yes.
And it could be, to Don's point. Thank you for being more clear, Don. I was trying to skirt around the issue, and not sound like a Mormon. But who knows? And speculation is fun, but I'm personally not going to hang any doctrine on it or whatever. It's just,
there's the thing that makes me think that there's a lot more to what we are going to experience is the fact that we have this humongous, never-ending universe out there. We have an endless, the human mind can't fathom what God has in store for us. And you have this huge, humongous creation out there, just waiting to be something done with it.
Seems like an awful lot of space to waste, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think God has big plans for it. I think there's more to it. And I don't mean to be the Mormon type, but I'm not going to put God in a box and say it's not going to happen. I'm not going to put God in a box and say it's going to be happening this way. But a lot out there, and every time man thinks he's got it, it's got to be this, and this law of physics says this, and this law of physics says that, and then they go and they send stuff out there, and wow, this planet is spinning opposite its axis. That can't be done. Surprise! We don't know it all.
That's a fact. We don't know it all.
And then he declassified my favorite planet and make it a blob of ice.
I don't know. I think Paul wants the driving school planet.
Yes. I will crush them.
All the drivers that cut him off, yeah. Yeah, the bad drivers. You get sent to Paul's planet. But yeah, very, very intriguing. Very timely, because we've been trying to figure out, well, when exactly is the Jubilee, and what do we do about it? When exactly is the Sabbath year? What do we do about it?
Yeah. Well, I think that I don't know. I think some people have tried to nail the Sabbath year down, but the 50 years kind of corresponds with the 50 days of Pentecost, so it's kind of a timely thing to talk about, because it also has to do with the patience of the saints. We're patiently awaiting that kingdom. We're very patiently confident that what has been written was inspired and is gonna happen. And that's faith is things that are unseen. And that's what we were patiently awaiting the millennial kingdom. We're waiting the return of Yeshua. And the apostles, the the smaller cycle of that, push this down a little, is that the apostles had to have that patience for 10 days. And if you think about it in the micro scale versus our scale, that was the only 10 days that those guys held it together. Was after Yeshua ascended, and they were still together in one accord on the day of Shavuot when the Holy Spirit came down upon them. And that's those 10 days, which culminated to 50 from his resurrection, is what is a kind of a microcosm of where we are right now. We're trying to hold it together day after day in Babylon, studying the word, trying to live right. What usually happens? What it usually happens when we try to live right? The world smacks us down. It doesn't work because we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. We're oddballs walking around, not eating pork. Look, you walk into Subway and you try to time it so that they don't put their gloves on because of the last thing that they made. We're totally, just odd ducks walking around out here.
Or we go to the sushi restaurant when they just open up for dinner because we know.
Right, exactly. Right.
Because we know the shrimp hasn't been cut on the board yet.
That's exactly right. So it's we're just studying, trying to learn it out. But I was just thinking about the part. I don't know why I was studying this, but the part that jumped out at me is the fact that they would be so incredibly vulnerable to attack by not having the stores, by not having the walls, by not having a king. And that right there is so counter everything they're digging up in the Middle East. Everything they're digging up shows these, walled cities, and Nimrod was able to slay lions, and people who had giant storehouses, and ultimately they got the giant storehouse at the temple. But that just jumped out at me. The fact that they had to live every day with this amazing amount of faith to know that at that 49th year, boom, you're done. You're just done. You're not going to plan anything for 2 years, and then watch and see if somebody tries to attack you. I can't wait to see that, because that's how it's going to be in the millennium. I believe that's how it's going to be in the millennium. We're actually going to live this way. I cannot wait to see that. To see that volunteer corn for 3 million people just poof show up right outside the city. That's going to be a marvelous day. Yeah.
Or suddenly all our clients who owe us tons of money pay us just in time that we can take a year off. Yeah.
Right.
Wow. That's wishful thinking.
Or the Wells Fargo just says, yeah, your mortgage is done. It's all yours. Right?
Yeah.
Right. That's probably not going to happen.
Well, not in this culture anyway.
No. Well, Bono from U2 had been going around the world trying to get the wealthy nations to forgive the debt of the poor nations about 20 years ago. He actually wanted to have a jubilee because he says, Botswana, there's no way they're ever going to pay that money back. And everybody's living off this miraculous interest that they have to continue borrowing to pay their interest. And Bono was saying, can we just have a jubilee here and just release all these poor countries of their debt? And I thought that was a neat application of it. So,
but no, we need cheap labor and slaves and place to test vaccines and did I say that out loud? Craziness. It's all sorts of craziness out there.
The only country that got the jubilee though was Iraq. After Iraq fell, they actually did forgive the debts of that country.